move to Appamont was unexpected and terrifying. We had left the safety of our home in Florida for a mysterious job my wife Anna had gotten at a small company in the middle of nowhere. With our son Luis just entering adolescence, we set out toward a new life, leaving behind family, friends, and memories. It was a long trip, but late at night we finally arrived at our new home, an old Victorian house overlooking a dark, dense forest. We found the house set back from the main road and half hidden by tall trees, giving it a lonely, sinister look despite its age. It was on that first night when Luis called us to his room. He was complaining that someone was scratching his window. We, tired and skeptical, found nothing when we went out to look. We assumed it was just the branches of the trees lashed by the wind. Days passed, and the scratching at Luis's window became more frequent. One night I decided to stay awake and keep watch. Surely I could find an explanation, I told myself, that it was a stray cat or something mundane. But what I witnessed froze my blood. From the edge of the forest, a tall, thin figure emerged. Its face was barely visible beneath a shroud of shadows. It crept silently up to Luis's window, and with long, thin nails, began to scratch the glass. Stunned, I ran out of the house, but the figure had already vanished back into the darkness of the woods. Luis was terrified, and from that moment on he refused to sleep alone in his room. A series of long marks remained on his window, a chilling reminder of that horrific figure. I asked around in town and discovered our home had a gloomy history. They said an old woman had lived there before us and had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Neighbors claimed they last saw her heading into the forest. From then on, strange events began to happen in the house. Our lives changed completely. We spent sleepless nights waiting for that horrible figure to reappear. We never knew what it wanted, but one thing was certain. The memory of that thing, with its hidden face and its nails raking the window, will remain with us forever. Since then, I've learned a valuable lesson. Always pay attention to the stories about the place you plan to move to. They can be much more real than you think. Several years ago, while I was working as a taxi driver in the quiet city of Mephakor, I became entangled in a story that still haunts my dreams. It was a cold winter night. Snow fell heavily, and the wind howled between the buildings. In my taxi, I was driving an elderly man toward the outskirts of the city. He had a vacant look and barely spoke. But when we crossed the city limits, he pointed to a run-down gas station and asked me to stop there. There were no houses or other buildings nearby, just the road and the old gas station, lit by the moonlight. The old man got out of the taxi without a word and walked toward the restrooms. The doors were broken and the paint was peeling. The whole place looked forgotten by time. I watched from my taxi as he went into one of the restroom stalls and closed the door behind him. The snow began to fall harder, and I resigned myself to wait. However, after 30 minutes, the man didn't come back, so I got out of the taxi and walked to the restrooms. I thought the old man was trying to skip out on the fare. I called to him several times, but there was no answer. I decided to knock on the restroom door, but it gave way without resistance, so I opened it. And to my surprise, the restroom was empty. There was no sign of the old man, nor any other door he could have left through. I searched around the gas station, but found only the howling wind and the ceaseless falling snow. Alarmed and confused, I returned to my taxi and sped off, putting that forsaken gas station behind me. It was in the rearview mirror that I saw something that still chills my blood. From the darkness of the restroom, a figure emerged. The figure of the old man, now accompanied by the silhouette of a woman, also elderly. Both were barefoot and dressed in ragged clothes. Terror seized me, so I drove as fast as I could and didn't slow down until the gas station vanished from my sight. But the image of those two figures is etched in my mind. I never saw the old man again, and I still don't know what happened that night. Ever since, I avoid abandoned gas stations and, above all, lonely highways, because you never know what secrets hide in the dark. Decades ago, when I still worked as a journalist covering paranormal events for a little-known magazine, I had an encounter that changed my view of the world forever. I was investigating a series of disappearances that had occurred on the outskirts of Foston, all linked to an old gas station dating back to the 1970s. The station was located on a desolate road, several kilometers from the nearest town. Many locals avoided the area, claiming it was cursed. One night, armed with my camera and a flashlight, I drove to the station to see if I could find any explanation for the disappearances. The place was eerily silent, save for the occasional chirp of a night insect. The fuel pumps were rusted out, and the small shop beside them was crumbling. While exploring the store, I heard a sound coming from the restroom area. With my heart pounding, I headed that way, my flashlight casting a trembling beam through the dark. When I arrived, I discovered one of the stalls was occupied. A flickering light shone from within, and I could hear faint murmurs. With a knot in my stomach, I knocked on the door, and it opened immediately. There, before my eyes, was a child no older than 10, playing with an old toy truck. He looked up at me with a smile, as if my presence were the most natural thing in the world. I tried to speak to him, but every time I asked a question, he simply smiled and went back to his toy. He picked up the truck and ran out of the restroom, vanishing into the darkness. I decided to run after him. When I reached the spot where he should have been, I found only the toy truck abandoned on the ground. In the days that followed, I looked into the place's history and discovered that in the 1970s, a boy had been hit by a truck near the gas station. According to reports, he had been given a toy truck identical to the one I found. That night, I stopped dismissing ghost stories as mere tales. Something inexplicable had happened at that abandoned gas station, something beyond our understanding. Now, whenever I pass an abandoned station, I can't help but think of that boy and the shadows that linger in the forgotten corners of the world. In my youth, I worked as a long-haul trucker, crisscrossing the country. It was on one of those solitary trips that something happened which made me question everything I knew about the natural and the supernatural. I was driving along a secondary highway in the middle of the night, hauling a load of produce from Kansas to Colorado. The road was long and desolate, flanked on both sides by fields of wheat. As the night deepened, my truck's headlights were the only source of light, barely able to pierce the darkness. At one point in the journey, my eyelids grew heavy, so I decided to find a place to rest. That's when I saw the flickering lights of an old abandoned gas station in the distance. Despite its dilapidated state, it seemed like a decent place to stretch my legs and take a short break. I parked and ventured into the station. The pumps were oxidized and the shop windows were broken. Everything was silent, except for the wind blowing through the nearby wheat fields. Then I noticed one of the restroom doors was ajar, swaying gently in the wind. Intrigued, I approached and pushed it open. Inside the bathroom, an old faucet dripped, and in the mirror I saw a reflection that stopped me cold. It wasn't my face in the glass, but that of a young woman, pale and sad-eyed, staring straight at me. Paralyzed with fear, I could do nothing but look at her. She lifted a hand and pointed toward the door behind me. Slowly, I turned to look, and when I looked back at the mirror, she was gone. Heart hammering, I ran out of the bathroom and back to my truck. When I started the engine, a light flared from the bathroom, and as I looked back, I saw the young woman standing in the doorway, watching me as I drove away. Later, At a roadside cafe, I heard the story of a young woman who had died in a car accident near that station in the 1950s. Since then, many truckers had reported seeing her spirit at the old gas station. I never took that highway again, and every time I pass an abandoned station, I remember the young woman and her sad gaze. It made me realize that on lonely roads, we're never truly alone. I used to work as a private detective in a small Midwestern town, and one case in particular kept me up many nights. Even today, decades later, I find it hard to forget. There had been a string of disappearances in town. All the victims were young, between 18 and 25, who vanished in the dead of night without any apparent reason. The only clue I had was that all the disappearances occurred near an old abandoned gas station on the outskirts. One night I decided to stake the place out. It stood at the end of a dirt road, and the only light came from the stars and the moon. Despite the cold, I got out of the car and approached the station cautiously. From the outside, the place seemed normal, if a bit gloomy. The windows were grimy, and the pumps were covered in dust. As I neared the door, I noticed it was slightly open, so I pushed it and went inside. The air smelled damp and musty, but there was something else, a metallic odor I couldn't identify at first. I moved deeper into the station and soon reached the restroom. When I opened the door, I found the source of the smell. There was liquid spattered everywhere. There were marks and stains on the walls, and the mirror was broken. But the most unsettling thing was a message scrawled in red on the mirror: "Don't look back." Despite the warning, I instinctively glanced over my shoulder, and in that instant the lights went out and an icy dread filled the place. I tried to run, but the door was blocked. In the darkness, I heard a whisper, barely audible. In a desperate act, I managed to break the window and escape the station, leaving behind me mocking laughter and suffocating darkness. The next day, the police searched the station and found several personal belongings of the missing. From then on, the disappearances stopped, but the identity of the perpetrator and their whereabouts remains a mystery. The gas station was demolished, but the experience left a permanent scar. I still get chills every time I pass an abandoned station, remembering the echo of that eerie laugh and the sinister warning, "Don't look back." It was supposed to be a routine trip. I was going from Dallas to Austin on a quick work assignment. As a journalist, I often had to make long drives to cover different stories. It was late at night, and I was trying to reach Austin before dawn. The road was fairly deserted, except for a few cargo trucks passing now and then. As I drove, I noticed my fuel was getting low, so I decided to stop at the next gas station to fill up. In the distance, I saw the lights of a solitary station. It looked abandoned, but the lights were on, so I decided to stop. As I approached, I noticed there were no other cars around, only an old pickup parked beside the convenience store. After refueling, I went into the store to pay. The place was silent, the lights flickered, and the shelves were half empty. While I looked for someone to take my payment, I heard a noise coming from the back room. It sounded like a struggle. My reporter's instincts kicked in, so I decided to investigate. Carefully, I approached the back door and listened. I heard whispering voices and the sound of something metallic clattering to the floor. At that moment, I decided to call the police and report what was happening. While I was on the phone, a man came out of the back room. He looked nervous, sweating and glancing around. When he saw me, he startled and tried to speak, but no words came out. I kept calm and told him the police were on their way. Right then, the back door opened again and another man came out pointing a gun. He told the first man to start the truck and ordered me to drop my phone. Fortunately, the police arrived in time. There was a confrontation and the men were arrested. It turned out they had been using the gas station as a front for their criminal activities and had kidnapped the owner, whom they had locked in the back room. That night could have been my last, but in the end I got a big story for the paper, and from then on I never looked at gas stations the same way. It was a cold winter night. Snow covered the roads of Minnesota like a white blanket that swallowed sound and smothered the headlights. I was driving alone, returning from a business trip. My car was running low on fuel, and my only goal was to find a gas station before I ended up stranded. In the distance, I saw some flickering lights. There was a station. It looked abandoned, but the service sign still glowed like a beacon in the storm. Relieved not to have to spend the night trapped in the cold, I accelerated toward it. As I got closer, I noticed no movement. The shop was dark and the pumps were covered in frost, but I had no other choice. So I got out and tried one of the pumps. To my surprise, it seemed to work, even though it was encased in a thick layer of ice. I started filling the tank, but when I looked toward the shop, I noticed a quick movement inside the dark windows. Puzzled, I left the pump and approached the store. Through the frost-covered glass, I could make out a shadowy figure moving inside. I knocked and called out for help, but there was no response. In the end, I decided to go in. I needed to pay for the fuel. When I opened the door, a blast of cold air hit me. Inside, everything was dark and silent, except for a low hum coming from the back of the store. I walked slowly toward the sound, stumbling over shelves and fallen objects in the dark, until I found the source, a dust-covered transistor radio that was somehow still working. It was tuned to an emergency station. The announcer's voice spoke about a storm warning and the need to seek shelter. Suddenly, a noise made me turn around. Behind me, the figure I had seen earlier was moving. It was wrapped in shadows, but I could see it was a tall, thin man. I shouted, asking who he was, but he didn't answer. He only came closer, a threatening silhouette in the dark. I turned and ran for the door, only to find it jammed. I looked around for an exit, but there wasn't one. Only the dark figure advancing slowly, the radio crackling, and the storm outside. In a desperate move, I grabbed an empty can from a shelf and threw it toward the figure. I heard a thud, a groan, and then silence. I used the chance to run. I slammed into the door with all my strength until it gave way. I hurled myself into the snow outside and ran to my car. I started the engine and sped off as fast as I could. In the rearview mirror, I saw the figure step out of the store and stand beneath the flickering service sign. Despite the distance and the storm, it seemed to me that in his eyes there was a strange mix of surprise and, oddly, relief. I drove the rest of the night without stopping, frightened and confused. When I got home, I realized I had the old transistor radio in my pocket. I didn't remember picking it up, but there it was, still humming, still issuing warnings to anyone who might listen. Though I never went back to that station and never found an explanation for what happened, the radio became a constant reminder of that night. It remained a point of contact I still don't fully understand, a reminder that on the road, you never know what surprises you might find. And to this day, whenever I hear the sound of a transistor radio, I can't help but glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see a dark figure standing beneath the flickering glow of a service sign.